Mist hung thick over Forgotten Valley, curling through the ancient pines, and clinging to jagged cliffs, swallowing every sound and bending the light as the search squad moved forward cautiously, boots crunching on frozen leaves, eyes darting between shadows, scanning every root, every boulder, unaware of the shapes watching from the fog. Branches snapped underfoot as a sudden gust of wind rattled the treetops, carrying whispers that might have been voices or perhaps only the imagination of the men, and a distant crack echoed like a gunshot, freezing them in place, hearts hammering as they strained to hear what else might move in the silence. A flash of pale light caught the eye of one soldier, a figure slipping between trees, impossibly fast, leaving only the shadow of its movement, and behind them the creek gurgled over ice-streaked stones, carrying faint scratching noises, as if something moved beneath the frozen water, unseen but watching. High on a ridge, the fog parted for a brief moment, revealing an abandoned campsite. Tents, shredded and burned footprints circling, as if in a ritual, and a lone boot lying in the mud, caked with dried blood that could not be explained, sending a shiver through the squad. Suddenly a rifle cracked from somewhere in the ruins, echoing across the valley, precise and deliberate, making every muscle taut, eyes wide, breaths shallow, and somewhere above a boy watched from the shadow of a collapsed balcony, trembling, yet holding the weapon steady, the fear in his small frame betrayed only in the quiver of his fingers. From a distance, a mother clutched her children under the remnants of a crumbling doorway, praying silently, as dust fell from the ceiling, settling on frozen hands and pale faces, and for a fleeting moment, she swore she glimpsed a pale figure moving impossibly fast, slipping between shadows and vanishing before her eyes could focus. A low howl echoed from the western cliffs, long, mournful, almost human, stirring the fog into twisting shapes, and the search squad felt the valley close in around them, sounds amplifying and warping every step, now dangerous, every shadow potentially alive, while the trees themselves seemed to whisper warnings no one could fully comprehend. In the heart of the valley, an ancient stone circle appeared through the mist, moss-covered and broken, etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and change when observed, and as they approached, the air grew heavy with the scent of wet earth decay, and something else, something metallic, almost alive, while distant voices, children laughing or crying, echoed from places the mind could not locate. Locals would later murmur of the valley's guardian, a figure neither fully human nor entirely shadow, gliding silently, appearing and disappearing without pattern, and some swore that even the wind carried its presence, watching patient, inexorable, while official reports called it a singular disappearance, unable to explain footprints ending at cliffs with no paths. Radio static that responded almost deliberately, or the diaries left behind, pages torn, ink smeared, filled with cryptic sketches and half-written warnings. The search squad had entered, and the valley had waited, patient, inexorable, swallowing time and sound. And whatever lingered inside was not about to let them go, leaving questions and chills that would haunt anyone who dared follow their trail for decades to come. It was early June 1987. The height of spring in the Appalachians' yet forgotten valley remained cloaked in a dense, almost unnatural mist that twisted around ancient pines and jagged cliffs, swallowing every sound and bending the light into strange, shifting patterns, as if the valley itself were alive. The search squad, 3 men trained in wilderness survival and mountain navigation, stepped cautiously along a narrow ridge, packs heavy on their shoulders, eyes scanning every shadow, every crack in the rock, hearts quickening as they felt the weight of centuries pressing down around them. The ground beneath was uneven and treacherous, roots and boulders hidden beneath moss and fog, making each step a careful negotiation between caution and momentum. Somewhere ahead, a creek gurgled over ice-streaked stones, carrying the faint sound of scratching beneath the water. Something unseen moving with deliberate stealth, causing each man to pause, listen, and tighten his grip on his gear. Branches snapped underfoot, as the wind shifted, suddenly rattling the canopy and carrying whispers that seemed almost human. Laughter pleading warning, or perhaps merely imagination. The shadows stretched, unnaturally flickering at the edge of their vision, and glimpses of movement too fast, too fluid for human stride made them question what was real. One of the men caught sight of a pale figure slipping behind a collapsed cabin, moving like smoke, vanishing before he could point it out to the others. Sunlight fought to penetrate the dense foliage, creating fragmented beams that danced across the forest floor, highlighting the moss-covered ruins of a centuries-old logging outpost, where rusted tools and broken beams hinted at lives long past, and footprints in the mud suggested recent passage. As they descended into a narrow gorge, the fog thickened so that sight was limited to mere feet, the walls slick with moss and hidden water echoing every sound. A misplaced footfall sounded like a gunshot. Distant echoes returned in warped forms, bending reality and perception. Locals later said that in this gorge, time itself seemed to stretch and compress. Hikers reported minutes becoming hours, hours becoming lost days, as if the valley toyed with chronology, testing the resolve of those who dared enter. The men felt it too, the strange heaviness in the air, the inexplicable moments when they thought someone had passed just behind them, only to find nothing. Beyond the gorge, a clearing appeared, dominated by an ancient stone circle, partially hidden beneath thick vines carved with symbols that seemed alive, shifting under the eyes. The men approached cautiously, noticing faint grooves in the stones, scratches almost deliberate, and the temperature dropped suddenly, the air thick with the scent of damp earth moss and an unfamiliar metallic tang. According to folklore, the stones had been used for rites of protection or punishment, invoking forces tied to the valley's guardian half-human, half-shadow, ever watchful. As they circled the stones, the fog curled around them, forming shapes that resembled figures crouching, watching, observing. And the wind carried voices. Children laughing, women whispering, sometimes crying, but no one could be seen. In the distance, the sound of a rifle cracking echoed through the valley, precise, deliberate, making the men freeze mid-step. Somewhere above, a boy crouched in the ruins of a balcony weapon, trembling in his hands, eyes wide. The mother behind him clutched her children under the crumbling doorway, dust falling from above, settling on pale, frozen faces. And just beyond the shadows flickered again figures moving between trees impossibly fast, vanishing before the eye could track them. Every moment became tense, the line between reality and imagination blurred. Every sound, every shadow was a threat, a warning, a presence. The valley seemed alive, patient, deliberate. And as the men moved deeper, every discovery compounded unease. Tattered clothing caught in branches, broken tools leaning against moss-covered stones, bones arranged in patterns suggesting intention, and footprints ending abruptly at cliffs that offered no path downward. Radios emitted faint static at unpredictable intervals, sometimes responding to the men's words, as if the valley itself listened, recorded, responded. The search squad had entered the heart of Forgotten Valley, and the valley had remembered every visitor, every trespass, every footstep, and it was waiting to show them that nothing inside its borders went unnoticed, leaving questions and chills that would haunt anyone who dared tread this domain for decades to come. The mist thickened as the men moved toward the western cliffs, where ancient trees twisted into grotesque shapes and shadows seemed to stretch far longer than their sources. Every step brought the soft crunch of leaves and broken branches, yet sometimes they heard nothing at all, as if the valley swallowed sound, selectively revealing and hiding reality at its whim. Suddenly, one man froze, sensing movement above. A flicker of white, a shadow slipping between branches, gone before he could signal the others. The silence returned heavier this time, pressing against their chests, making every breath feel loud. Further along the valley opened into a shallow basin dotted with abandoned cabins and remnants of old logging camps, moss overtaking roofs and staircases, doors hanging from hinges. Footprints in the mud suggested someone or something had passed recently, but no figure appeared. The wind carried faint echoes of voices, whispers that were too articulate to be the wind alone, blending with distant bird calls and the trickle of a nearby stream. One of the men noticed a circle of stones half buried in the earth, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly under the fog. According to local legend, these stones marked the boundary of the Guardian's domain, and anyone crossing too far risked being taken lost or driven mad. As afternoon waned, the search squad came upon a narrow gorge walls slick with moss water, trickling into deep, unseen pools. The fog was nearly solid now, wrapping around their limbs, muffling sound, disorienting their senses. Strange, fleeting shapes danced at the corners of their vision, and the faintest scratching beneath their boots hinted at something moving unseen. One man swore he heard distant laughter, childlike melodic echoing from multiple directions, though no one was visible. The feeling of being watched intensified the air thick with anticipation, and the valley seemed to pulse with an almost sentient patience, as though it were calculating their every move. Every step, every glance, every hesitation drew them deeper into a place where reality and legend collided, and the search squad began to understand that the valley had its own rules, older than any map, older than any human memory. The search squad documented every detail meticulously. Each footprint in the mud, every snapped branch, every tent abandoned yet carefully arranged, as though the occupants had vanished in a deliberate sequence. Official maps confirmed the area had been surveyed repeatedly, yet none captured the twisted paths, hidden ravines, or sudden cliffs that appeared without warning, forcing the men to adjust constantly, their compasses spinning inexplicably. Diaries left behind revealed strange occurrences, sounds from nowhere. Shadows moving independently, whispers echoing across ridges and lights glimmering in the fog, fleeting and untraceable. Pages were smeared with mud and blood, some torn deliberately, suggesting someone or something tried to hide what had been written. Ranger logs from decades past recorded previous disappearances in the valley. Hikers who never returned, hunters whose gear was found scattered as if in a struggle with the unseen, and supplies taken without a trace. Official reports noted only names, dates, and fate unknown, but witness statements hinted at phenomena defying explanation. Some described figures moving with impossible speed through dense fog, glimpses of reflective surfaces and sudden sounds with no source. Footsteps echoing on empty ground or rocks shifting on their own. The search squad photographed and recorded each site. Torn clothing snagged on branches, a boot half buried in mud, fragments of equipment left from prior parties, and footprints that twisted unnaturally before disappearing. They investigated the creek, where faint scratches beneath the ice suggested something massive had passed. Moss and lichen on stones appeared disturbed, as if something brushed against them deliberately. Compasses spun wildly in gorges, radios emitted static, interspersed with faint voices, occasionally mimicking their own speech. Every anomaly was logged with exact coordinates and timestamps, forming a growing pattern of deliberate activity. The valley seemed alive, responsive, deliberate, a silent observer cataloging every movement of its intruders. Historical survey notes and Forest Service archives provided context. Decades-old trails no longer existed. Cabins had collapsed or been removed, yet remnants remained. Locals corroborated sightings, pale shapes flitting through fog lights, glimmering at impossible angles. Faint calls of human-like voices echoing from nowhere. One journal mentioned a guardian shadow observing from above, patient, calculating, waiting for trespassers to make mistakes. Artifacts added weight to the mystery. rusted tools leaning impossibly against rocks, fragments of clothing consistent with previous search parties, and skeletal remains positioned unnaturally, almost deliberately, as if arranged to communicate a warning. One diary contained a crude map with symbols matching carvings in the ancient stone circle, reinforcing patterns previously dismissed as coincidental. Coordinates of past disappearances aligned with mist-filled clearings, narrow gorges, and cliffs with no visible descent. Every observation, every anomaly seemed interconnected, suggesting a deliberate, unseen presence. Audio logs recorded by the squad added another layer of terror. Intermittent static, distant howls, footsteps without origin, and a voice whispering their names, soft, almost human, emanating from every direction at once. Environmental sensors measured sudden temperature drops, spikes in electromagnetic fields, and tremors in the earth beneath their feet, subtle but persistent. Each finding reinforced the notion that the valley was not merely a passive backdrop, but an active, intelligent force monitoring, cataloging, testing. Even the fact layer alone painted a chilling portrait, patterns of disappearance, repeated anomalies, and physical evidence that suggested forces operating beyond natural law. Every detail compounded unease, leaving the search squad, and anyone reading their records, haunted by the valley's silent, patient gaze. Locals whispered that Forgotten Valley had always been a place apart. Older than maps, older than any surveyor's record, a land where shadows moved independently, and the fog carried voices from the past. Children told stories of figures slipping through the mist, beckoning them deeper, always just beyond reach. Hunters vanished without trace, their packs left behind their footsteps, ending abruptly on cliffs that led nowhere. Some spoke of a guardian spirit, half human, half shadow, gliding silently through the trees, watching, waiting, testing anyone who dared enter. Elders recounted the tales of lost loggers and explorers, describing how entire parties had disappeared over decades. Tents were found, empty campfires, cold, and equipment scattered, sometimes in patterns suggesting deliberate arrangement. One journal described shadows that followed men for hours, vanishing only when attention was diverted. Voices echoed across ridges, calling names not theirs, whispering threats or guidance in tones that were never repeated. Trees bore scratches as if warning signs had been left for intruders, and certain stones were said to hum when approached. The valley was alive, patient, intelligent, and entirely hidden from outsiders. Travelers spoke of pale lights floating in the fog, moving counter to the wind, retreating when pursued, or vanishing altogether. Shapes darted at the edge of vision, disappearing before comprehension. A boy had once been seen standing atop a ridge, raising a trembling hand in warning, only to vanish into thin air moments later. A mother hiding in a crumbling cabin recalled hearing laughter and cries from no visible source. Some claimed the valley could bend perception, warp time, and manipulate sound. Minutes seemed like hours. Footsteps repeated endlessly, and the air itself seemed to pulse with a presence unseen. Ancient stone circles deep in the valley were said to mark thresholds where the guardian's influence was strongest. Symbols carved in stone were believed to communicate with the valley itself, warning, guiding, or punishing trespassers. Some who lingered too long inside the circles claimed to experience disorientation, hallucinations, or an overwhelming sense of being followed, while footprints and objects shifted mysteriously when unobserved. These anecdotes, passed down over decades, reinforced a single motif: the valley was alive. It observed, it judged, and it preserved its secrets fiercely. Seasoned rangers recalled strange occurrences during searches, radios transmitting unintelligible whispers, compasses spinning wildly, sudden temperature drops. Figures appeared in fog, moving without disturbing leaves or branches. Reports of this nature, dismissed officially as misperception, aligned closely with the diaries and journals left by previous parties. Each observation, each folklore account formed a consistent pattern across time and space. The valley had a memory, and anyone entering it became part of its story, woven into a tapestry of fact and myth impossible to separate. Voices, lights, fleeting shadows, and inexplicable movements formed a rhythm the search squad could not ignore. The presence of something ancient, patient, intelligent, and utterly alien pressed upon them. Every step was measured, every glance monitored. The line between reality and legend blurred as folklore became experience, and fact layer and myth layer converged to form a narrative the valley itself seemed to dictate. To enter Forgotten Valley was to enter a living story, one in which the invisible hand of history, nature, and legend guided, warned, and perhaps consumed. As dusk fell over Forgotten Valley, the mist thickened, curling through the pines and settling in the hollows like a living creature. The search squad felt the chill deepen, each breath visible hanging in the air, every movement magnified, every sound amplified. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching across rocks and roots, merging with the fog, and the valley seemed to watch silently, measuring their presence. The diaries and logs from previous parties flashed in their minds, recounting vanished companions. Footsteps that circled and ended abruptly, and whispers that led men astray. They entered a narrow gorge where sunlight never penetrated, walls slick with moss and moisture, the air damp and heavy. Every footfall echoed strangely, bouncing from cliff to cliff in impossible ways, creating phantom footsteps alongside their own. Branches snapped without cause, and distant cries, human childlike pleading, reverberated through the mist. The valley seemed to mock them, repeating sounds they thought were gone, stretching seconds into minutes. Some of the men glimpsed fleeting shapes between trees, figures moving too quickly to be human, their forms twisting and bending in impossible angles. At a collapsed cabin, they found signs of recent habitation. A small fire pit, still warm footprints in mud leading nowhere, and a torn blanket flapping in the wind as though dropped in haste. One man picked up a tattered journal, pages smeared and stained, sketches of figures crouching in the fog. Scribbles warning of a guardian that watched from above, patient, patient, as if every step taken inside the valley had already been anticipated. From the ridge above they thought they saw movement, a boy, pale, silent, staring, then gone. And in the same instant, the fog thickened behind them, obscuring the path they had come, making return impossible. Further along, an ancient stone circle emerged from the mist, partially covered in vines and moss. Symbols etched in the stones seemed to shift as the men approached. A sudden gust carried whispers in a language they could not recognize, melodic and eerie, repeating their own names, testing their resolve, bending their perception. The ground beneath vibrated faintly, almost imperceptibly, as though the valley itself breathed. Compasses spun wildly, radios emitted distorted voices, and shadows flickered in corners of vision that no eye could catch. Every anecdote from locals resurfaced in their minds. Lights floating against the wind, whispers luring travelers from trails, figures slipping through fog too fast to track. Hunters lost decades ago, hikers who never returned. All of it converged into a single motif. The valley had memory, intelligence, intent. It responded, it tested, it consumed. The men could feel it pressing, impatient, inexorable, omnipresent. Every step, every glance, every hesitation drew them deeper into the valley's story, a place where reality and legend intertwined, where fact layer and folklore layer merged into a single narrative. At twilight, distant cries echoed across ridges, punctuated by sudden flashes of pale light dancing through the trees. They glimpsed fleeting silhouettes on the rocks, crouched, moving, vanishing. The diaries had warned of this. The guardian did not need to reveal itself fully. Its presence alone could warp time, manipulate sound, and distort perception. Footsteps seemed to multiply, appearing behind them, beside them, yet no one was there. The valley orchestrated its own rhythm, testing each intruder, luring attention to some points while hiding others always calculating. The motif became undeniable. Patterns of disappearance footprints ending abruptly, whispers that returned questions rather than answers, and objects moving when unobserved. Each anecdote from locals, each fragment from past diaries, each recorded anomaly aligned across decades, forming a network of incidents too precise to dismiss as coincidence. The search squad began to understand that they were no longer merely observers but participants, woven into the valley's living story, moving through a narrative older than themselves, and every choice they made could have consequences far beyond comprehension. As night fully settled, the fog deepened to a near-solid gray. Trees twisted in impossible angles, cliffs seemed closer than they were, and sounds became unreliable. A distant howl echoed from the gorge, long, mournful, almost human. Their own voices bounced back at them, distorted, calling names they had not spoken. The diaries and folklore reinforced each other. The valley's intelligence was deliberate. Testing, observing, remembering. Every instance of the past, every disappearance, every legend converged upon this very night, this very intrusion, and the men realized they were at the nexus. The bridge was complete. The valley had shown them the pattern, and only the climax remained to reveal its full intent. Night had fully swallowed Forgotten Valley. The mist, now dense, almost solid, curling through the trees and cliffs like a living entity. The search squad moved cautiously. Senses heightened, every sound amplified, every shadow suspect. Their flashlights cut through pockets of fog, illuminating moss-covered rocks and twisted roots, yet each beam seemed to bend, revealing glimpses of movement where nothing should exist. A sudden crack echoed from above like branches snapping under enormous weight, yet no shape could be identified. Footsteps appeared in the mud, overlapping their own spiraling twisting, then vanished, leaving only the impression that someone or something had walked alongside them. The diaries they carried spoke of this moment, where past explorers described sudden chills, unseen forces, and voices echoing words never spoken. A pale figure darted across the clearing ahead, moving impossibly fast, vanishing before any of them could call out. The fog swirled around the men, thickening, obscuring the path they had carefully traced. Every step forward felt like moving through a viscous substance, as though the valley itself resisted their progress. A distant howl rose from the western cliffs, long, mournful, almost human. It echoed through gorges and hollows, bouncing in impossible directions. And then a whisper, soft, deliberate, calling their names. At first it seemed faint, then louder, repeating mocking teasing, as if the valley remembered every step they had taken. A sudden flash of light revealed the boy from legend, standing on a ridge, pale and still, his eyes glowing faintly, then gone in an instant, leaving only a sense of being observed. At the stone circle, the valley's power manifested fully. The symbols etched in the stones seemed to writhe, shifting under their gaze. Shadows gathered unnaturally, stretching and coiling like serpents. Voices rose, a cacophony of whispers, laughter, cries, indistinguishable from the wind, yet unnervingly deliberate. Their compasses spun wildly. Radios emitted static, punctuated with faint repetitions of their own words. Footsteps echoed from every direction. None of them belonged to human feet. The valley had revealed its intent. It tested patience, perception, fear. One member tried to call out. His voice caught in the fog, swallowed before it reached his companions. Another reached for the diary pages, fluttering as though caught by invisible hands. A pale light moved along the ridge, figures crouched behind rocks, fleeting. Eyes glimmered for a heartbeat, then vanished. The air vibrated with unidentifiable energy, subtle tremors beneath their feet, cold sweeps that brushed through clothing and skin. The men's senses rebelled against logic. Reality itself seemed to fragment. Suddenly a tent collapsed under an unseen force, canvas flapping violently, tools and gear scattering. A shadow moved across the clearing, humanoid yet impossibly elongated, disappearing into the fog. The boy appeared again, pointing silent. The mother from folklore crouched near a fallen beam, whispering prayers that seemed to echo back from nowhere. Their own footsteps were reflected in the mist, duplicating, spiraling, leading nowhere. The diary's warnings echoed, patterns repeated across decades, disappearances, anomalies, supernatural phenomena. The valley orchestrated every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light. It was aware, deliberate, patient, testing, guiding, consuming, and the men felt it. An invisible presence pressing against thought, sight, and balance, making even the familiar terrifying. Every sensation, every sight, every sound converged into a crescendo of dread. A scream rang out, sharp, human, then cut abruptly. Silence. Then footsteps again, circling, overlapping, vanishing. The mist lifted momentarily, revealing footprints that led over cliffs and ended in midair. Items from past parties scattered, some partially buried, others arranged meticulously, suggesting deliberation. One man caught a glimpse of eyes, silver and unblinking, watching from the trees. Then gone, leaving only cold dread and the realization that the valley had chosen its witnesses. The guardian manifested fully in perception, not always visible but present in every distortion, every anomaly, every unexplainable event. Time seemed to bend. Minutes stretched into eternity. Sounds repeated and warped. Lights moved counter to physics. Reality fractured, and the men understood that their presence alone had been an intrusion into an intelligence older than humanity. The climax had arrived, the valley's intent fully revealed, and there was no turning back. Dawn barely pierced the mist over Forgotten Valley, the fog curling through trees and rocks, hiding every path, every secret. The search squad emerged, or thought they did, exhausted, shaken, aware that not everything had been witnessed. Some gear remained behind tents, torn journals, smeared footprints fading into nothing. And yet the valley had remembered every intrusion. Locals whispered again of shadows glimpsed at ridges, pale lights moving through fog, and voices echoing across clearings. Stories passed down for decades now seemed to converge. Fact and folklore intertwined, each disappearance, each anomaly forming a pattern impossible to ignore. The valley's guardian, patient and deliberate, had observed, tested, and perhaps chosen. What the men had seen was only a fragment, a fleeting impression of forces older than memory. Some claim that those who entered the valley are never truly free, that the shadows follow, that whispers linger in dreams, that the unseen watches every return. The diaries hint at a truth no map can chart, a presence that is alive in every mist, in every stone, in every echo. Even when silence returns, it carries a weight, a memory of what happened, a warning of what might come. And so the valley endures, patient, inexorable, swallowing footsteps, swallowing sound, absorbing all who trespass. Each new visitor becomes part of its story, another thread in a tapestry that blends fact and legend. The guardian remains unseen yet undeniably present, shaping perception, bending time, orchestrating fear. Every reader, every listener, every witness is left with questions. What is real? What is imagined? And what the valley allows to remain. The search squad returned changed, haunted by what they saw, what they heard, and what they could never truly understand. The mist lingered behind them, settling into hollows, whispering through trees, carrying secrets from centuries past. The valley keeps them alive in memory, yet some pieces are never returned, As the sun rose higher, light failed to dispel the fog completely. Shadows persisted. The wind carried whispers. Footsteps echoed where no one walked. And still the valley waited patient, watching, calculating. For anyone who dares return, the story continues. You have just witnessed another account from classified history. If you wish to uncover more, subscribe.